Welcome to week 3, and this week we are reading Yeh-Shen, which is a Cinderella story from China. So we're going to be focusing on analyzing the events and characters in Yeh-Shen and how they contribute to the story or the plot overall. So the 3 standards we're going to be working with are literature standards. So our first one is determining the central idea of a text or theme of a text and making sure that we are remaining objective when talking about a summary. So summary distinct from personal opinions. So remember that in these sorts of questions, you want to make sure that you're keeping out I think, I believe. You're keeping your personal pronouns out of the answers and you're just answering objectively. Our second standard that we're working with this week is RL 2.5. So analyze how a particular sentence, chapter, scene, or stanza fits into the overall structure of the text to develop the theme, setting, or plot. So how do the author's specific word choices affect the story overall? How do specific scenes serve to set up other scenes, in this case with foreshadowing? And finally, we have 2.6, explain how an author develops the point of view of a narrator or speaker in a text. So as we know by now, the author and the speaker of a text are 2 totally different voices. So the author uses specific language in order to convey things about a character, how the character is thinking and feeling. So we're going to be exploring that with the character of Yeh-Shen. Finally, we have some vocabulary words. These in green here are going to be the words that pop up that you may be unfamiliar with throughout the story as you read. So Yeh-Shen is on page 335 of the textbook, and a little bit about the author. Ai-Ling Louie grew up in the suburbs of New York, and she worked as a teacher and a librarian. She was familiar with the story of Yeh-Shen because it's a very old folk tale that's passed down from generation to generation. So she heard that from her grandmother. And actually the Chinese version of Yeh-Shen is much older than the European version of Cinderella, which is the one that most of us are more familiar with. Ai-Ling Louie also works on a series called Amazing Asian Americans because she noticed that there was a lack of biographies about Asian American authors. So this story is pretty short. It's only about 4.5 pages. So it's a little bit of an easier read than what we just read with all of the Greek names and places. The last story had a little bit more antiquated language than what we're used to. This story should be a little bit of an easier read. So I'll just be going over the questions. We have for the whole week questions 1 through 7. So on Monday, I suggested answering 1 and 2, Tuesday 3 and 4, Wednesday 5 and 6, and then 7 on Friday, as well as a short journal reflection. So question 1 asks you to reread page 335, which is where the story starts. Which 2 characters are introduced on this page, and how are they similar to 2 of the main characters from other versions of Cinderella that you know? So if you have Disney Plus, it's a great time to rewatch Cinderella with your family. You can think about either the 1950 version or even the 2015 version. Both are what we normally think of whenever we think of Cinderella in our country here in the US. So how are these characters in Yeh-Shen similar to those characters? Number 2 asks you between page 335 and 336, what are the conflicts or struggles that Yeh-Shen has faced so far? So based on what you know of her past, of her family, her circumstances, what are some of those things that she's struggling with? Question 3 tells you to reread page 337 from lines 54 to 57. What words and phrases foreshadow possible future events? So let's take a look at lines 54 to 57. So we're at the point in the story where the old man has appeared to Yeh-Shen. Her fish has been killed by her stepmother, her only fish friend, or her only friend who is a fish. And this old man appears to try to console her. And he says, now you must listen carefully to this. The bones of your fish are filled with a powerful spirit. Whenever you are in serious need, you must kneel before them and let them know your heart's desire, but do not waste their gifts. So he lets her in on a secret here. He's giving her this valuable piece of information, but he also is giving her a warning with that by saying, do not waste their gifts. So the actual question that it's asking you is, what do these lines foreshadow, and how does the foreshadowing help develop the plot? So foreshadowing is a literary device that authors use on purpose to hint at something that's to come later in the story. So they're giving you a small clue in the beginning or in the middle that this event is going to happen later on. So what are some possible words and phrases that the old man is using here that is a foreshadowing device by the author? What could these words be hinting at later in the story, specifically in lines 54 to 57? Question 4 tells you to reread lines 68 through 67. So the time passed and spring came. Festival time was approaching. It was the busiest time of the year. Such cooking and cleaning and sewing there was to be done. Yeh-Shen had hardly a moment's rest. At the spring festival, young men and young women from the village hoped to meet and choose who they would marry. How Yeh-Shen longed to go, but her stepmother had other plans. She hoped to find a husband for her own daughter and did not want any man to see the beauteous Yeh-Shen first. So again, we have some foreshadowing in this passage as well. It's asking you, what do these lines foreshadow, and how does that foreshadowing help develop the plot? So the narrator is telling us that there is a spring festival. Yeh-Shen really wants to go, but the stepmother does not want her to go because she does not want any of the young men to see how beautiful Yeh-Shen is, because she wants to find a husband for her own daughter instead. So based on that, based on us knowing that, what do you think could happen? And how is this adding some of that tension that's building the plot forward? How is this adding to the plot? If you think back to what we just read in Black Ships Before Troy, there was some foreshadowing in there as well. It said at one point that Paris got what he wanted. He got the beautiful wife, Helen, from Aphrodite, but from that all the sorrows followed. So that was our hint from the author. Bad things are going to come from this. This is not going to end well. That was our hint. So what could this be hinting at here for us later in the story? Question 5 again talks about foreshadowing. It tells you to reread lines 94 to 97 on page 338. So that's the very top of page 338. Be sure you do not lose your golden shoes, said the spirit of the bones. Yeh-Shen promised to be careful. Delighted with her transformation, she bid a fond farewell to the bones of her fish as she slipped off to join in the merrymaking. So just like in the fairy tale that most of us are familiar with Cinderella, the fairy godmother appears, gives Cinderella, turns her pumpkin into a coach, and gives her a beautiful dress to replace her rags. Similarly, the fish's spirit has given her a beautiful gown of azure blue and these tiny golden slippers. And as exciting as this is, as happy as Yeh-Shen is, the fish is giving her a warning. Be sure you do not lose your golden shoes. So how does the foreshadowing, which is the warning from the fish's spirit, in this part of the story affecting the plot? What do you think this could be foreshadowing at? And how is this continuing to add that tension? How is this moving the plot forward? So we've got 3 questions there that have to do with foreshadowing, what it is, what words are used to foreshadow, what it could be foreshadowing that's going to happen later, and how it's affecting the plot. So think about those things as you're reading Yeh-Shen. Question 6 is referring to the middle of page 338. It says, in this section, the spirit will not speak. So looking at that part there, this is when Yeh-Shen is running away from the festival because her stepsister recognized her. So she's running from her stepsister and she loses one of the slippers. And all of a sudden, just like in the fairy tale version, it hits midnight and Cinderella's transformation disappears. In this case, one of her shoes falls off and all of her beautiful clothes go away as well. She's left in her rags. So it says only one thing remained, a tiny golden shoe. Yeh-Shen hurried to the bones of her fish and returned the slipper, promising to find its mate, but now the bones were silent. Sadly, Yeh-Shen realized that she had lost her only friend. She hid the little shoe in her bed straw and went outside to cry. So something has caused this to happen. There is some reason why the spirit of the bones is no longer speaking to her. So think back to the previous question about foreshadowing. The question is asking you, why do you think the spirit is not speaking to her? Support your answer with evidence from the text. So make sure anytime you have a question that mentions evidence that you are using race, restating, answering, citing your sources, and explaining your answer. So make sure that you're giving me some line numbers with this question. Question 7, the last question for the story, asks you, from the reading on page 339, describe how Yeh-Shen's traits are revealed through her actions in this section. What other traits has Yeh-Shen revealed in this story? So we get a hint of her personality all throughout the story. She shows us what kind of girl she is. However, on this page, there's a specific action that she does. Whenever she goes to the pavilion to try to get the slipper, she has a motivation for that that's different from the other women who are trying to get the slipper. So what does that motivation tell us about Yeh-Shen? What aspects or traits, characteristics, elements of her personality is this showing us, that what kind of a person she is? Similarly, what else has been revealed about Yeh-Shen's character all throughout the story? So we're analyzing her character in this way. If I were analyzing the stepmother's character, I would look at the beginning of the story and I would say that that reveals to us that some of her traits are jealous, wicked, immoral, unethical, mean, cruel, right? We can come up with all these adjectives, all these descriptive words based on what we've read from the stepmother. So that I just analyzed the stepmother's character, I'm asking you to analyze Yeh-Shen. That's it for Yeh-Shen. Your very last assignment for this week is to write a brief journal paragraph reflection on either how your family is dealing with digital learning at this time of the pandemic, or what are you most looking forward to when social distancing is over. You have your choice to choose between either prompt. You can find all of these questions in the PowerPoint. It has been brought to my attention that that is an easier format to work with than Microsoft Word. So you can just go ahead and make sure that you are clicking Open in PowerPoint online so that you can edit it. Type your answers underneath the questions that I have written. Make sure that you're using complete sentences always and race when applicable. Next week, I will start taking off points for any answers that are not in complete sentences because we are in the 4th 9 weeks of language arts and we should always be writing in complete sentences. So make sure that you're practicing that as you're going through the slides this week. Then you can either submit the answers to me or you can click up the upper right hand side where it says share. You can type in my name and my email should come up. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me on Remind, Teams, my email. If you're having trouble opening the document or submitting your answers, if you have another question that I haven't addressed here, please let me know as soon as possible so that I can help you. Okay. Also starting this week, we do have a new attendance policy in place that came through from the school district today. So you must turn in at least one assignment per week in order to be considered present. So just checking in and telling me here, I love hearing from you very much, but that will not count as attendance. You must submit at least one assignment each week in each class in order to be considered present for that class. Well, that's it. I'll see you next week. Thank you and have a great day.